So I'm here to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ras Grewal. He is a cardiologist in Ottawa, and he completed his medical school at St. George's University in 2002. He then completed his residency in internal medicine in 2005, and then fellowship in cardiology in 2008 in Philadelphia. He is board certified in internal medicine and in cardiology in both the States and in Canada. He has interest in adult cardiology, including in risk assessment, prevention, diagnosis, and the management of chronic heart conditions. He works at both the Merivale Cardiovascular Clinic here in Ottawa, as well as the Queensway Carleton Hospital. So our clinic refers a lot to Dr. Grewal and his colleagues, so I know he's very busy. He's made the time to come and talk to us today. We welcome you. And also, if you have any questions, there's paper on the sides of the room. Please write them down and you can pass them forward. Thanks.
Thank you for that introduction. It's an honor for me to be here today. I see that your schedule is quite busy today, and as much as you are investing in your cultivation of your spiritual health, we must not forget our physical health. I think they go hand in hand. This topic is important because it crosses cultures. It is a huge burden in the world, and we also, many of you probably understand that there is a tendency for this to be a little more burdensome in our community. Cardiovascular disease encompasses a broad range of areas. Okay, you would accept cardiovascular disease to be representative of people who might have heart attack or stroke, but it also is a complication of having blockages in your leg arteries, and also enlargement of the main vessel of your heart, of the aorta, which can cause enlargement in the abdomen. So when we talk about cardiovascular disease, it is all of these issues. Much of our discussion will be focused on how we can look at all of the factors that can make us prone to developing these problems, and how can we make important changes in our lives to minimize our personal chance to get this problem. A lot of the issues will focus on the first area, heart attack and heart failure, but also stroke. As I said, this is a global burden. 17 million deaths in the world are because of cardiovascular disease, okay? There are many risk factors, and many of these risk factors, you as an individual have the ability to control. Okay? We put our faith in a pill, but you need to put faith in yourself to make appropriate changes to lessen your chance to have this significant problem. In a large population-based study that was done that looked at cardiovascular disease risk in a global population, we have been able to really demonstrate clearly and prove quite clearly that more than 90% of the risk of cardiovascular disease is related to 9 main risk factors, again, many of which are modifiable, meaning we can change. Over half of death related to heart disease is related to 5 main risk factors. So a common question is, well, what about South Asians? Because we hear there's increased chance for South Asians to have heart disease. And based on looking at our population, it is in part related to the growing burden of diabetes and hypertension. Those 2 risk factors, for some reason, are starting to grow in the South Asian community. In fact, in India by 2025, the burden of diabetes will have outpaced most countries in the world. Some of these risk factors I hope are not relevant, because I know we all vary in our habits as a culture, but I mention this because, look, smoking is not unique to any one culture. We are seeing it growing in India, and this may be part of globalization, urbanization, but we are seeing this habit being picked up by a lot of people. And this is a deadly mix for anyone who is already at increased risk for cardiovascular disease. This is certainly not a habit we want. I don't need to belabor the point. We all know smoking is bad. It is something that will definitely increase our risk of heart disease and death, and quitting is critically important. So I don't think I need to belabor that point. This is very intuitive and common knowledge for everybody. Hypertension, however, is an area we need to understand more. In Canada, it is present in 1 in 5 Canadians, okay? Hypertension itself can increase your risk of stroke, heart attack, and heart failure. These are chronic conditions that if you develop these problems, the likelihood of these continuing to be a problem in your life increases. What are some of the targets? Many of you may or may not know someone with hypertension, and some of you may be treated for hypertension right now. So it is important that if you do not have hypertension, we will talk about how we can avoid potentially getting hypertension. But if you have hypertension, make sure it's treated properly. Often, many people have blood pressure cuffs at home, and it is common practice that many people are measuring their blood pressure at home. So if you're doing it, you should do it right, and also know what you're looking for. No point in measuring and documenting a number if you don't know how to interpret it. So importantly, at home, you ideally want to make sure your numbers when you're checking it is on average less than 135/85. So if you're measuring at home, that is your target. If you are a diabetic, at home you want to be less than 130/80. If you are measuring and getting above these numbers, you should be talking to your doctor saying, look, my numbers are not good at home. What are we going to do? Okay? And in particular instances, depending on how you have a conversation with your doctor, depending on particular risk factors like kidney disease, we may be more aggressive on blood pressure. We might want an even tighter control of your blood pressure. So if you're treated for hypertension, you should always know what your target is, and you should also make efforts to achieve that target. As we get through the talk, we will again go over how you can achieve that target. Because quite frankly, many of these risk factors that we are going to go through are very intertwined. One risk factor will influence another, and treatment of another may help benefit another. So they are very linked. This is just a graphic. We don't have to get too bogged down with these lines, but let's just look at the colors. This bottom blue line shows that people with normal blood pressure over time have less long-term risk for the development of heart failure as one particular side effect of long-term hypertension. You can see the risk of developing heart failure goes up in higher risk categories of hypertension. So these are well-established risk factors. Oh, this is only to show you that this is unequivocal evidence here, okay? This is studied. We have outcome data following people for many decades, and we cannot deny that having hypertension is a risk for some serious problems. What are some of the things that you can do to help either avoid the development of hypertension or to control your own hypertension? It goes without saying that physical exercise is important. We will not ignore this topic. It will come up later. Weight management is important. Even a modest reduction in one's weight can reduce both the top and bottom number of your blood pressure. The same goes for physical exercise. Alcohol consumption should also be reduced because that has an impact on development of hypertension. And also stress. I think we overlook this one. We will be talking about this later, but we all have very complicated lives at times, and we have to acknowledge that there is a physical toll that psychological stress can have on us, and it will affect your blood pressure. And having blood pressure can make you at risk for cardiovascular disease, heart attack, and stroke. So you can see the domino effect we're causing here. Diet is also important. We're going to talk more about diet, but the subcategory of diet is our intake of sodium. We, as a society, eat too much salt, okay? We eat too much salt. You have to be very conscientious of where salt and sodium lurks in your foods and make very concerted efforts as a family and as an individual to cut it out of your diet. And it's hard to speak in terms of numbers because we don't think of sodium as 2,000 milligrams. But guess what? I think you should start to learn that. I will teach you a little bit about how to think about sodium in terms of milligrams, because as we get through a day, we need to kind of have an idea of how much we've consumed. In general, we are eating 2 to 3 times more sodium than we should be, overall, as a culture, as a society. The best thing is to make home-cooked meals. And often in our culture, we are doing that. We are getting fresh ingredients that came straight from the ground and have been minimally processed in a facility, and you are making your meal from that. In that pathway, there's not a lot of salt. There's not a lot of sodium. But once you start getting processed foods, that's where the biggest problem is. Processed food accounts for close to 80% of our daily intake, okay? 10% comes from what is naturally in the food itself, and another smaller percentage comes from the salt shaker. So when I say watch your salt and you say, oh, I'll put the salt shaker away, I'm sorry, but that's not the greatest source of your sodium. It's in the processed food, so never mind the salt shaker. A lot of foods, bread, crackers, baked goods. You think, oh, baked goods, many of them are sweet. Not always. Even the sweet foods have a lot of salt. But baked goods, croissants, bagels, snack foods, any sauce that you get from a store, whether it's tomato sauce or salad dressing or soup, these have typically the highest count of sodium. So also be careful when you go to a restaurant. It's loaded with salt. And guess what? Even our own culture, our ethnic restaurants, they put too much salt in the food also. So don't think, oh, I'm eating my own food. They put too much salt in it. Think of alternative strategies. You don't need to buy salad dressing. Make your own. Lemon juice, lime juice is good for the flavor. It may be a good substitute for sodium. You can put herbs and vinegar. You've made your own salad dressing. You don't need store-bought salad dressing. Forget it. When you're cooking, don't add a lot of salt to your food, okay? When you have prepared the plate, encourage family members, don't just reach for the salt shaker. Taste it first, for crying out loud. Taste it. Do you need salt? Don't do reflexive action. Many people do that. Enjoy your foods for the natural flavors that they have, and guess what? It takes the human brain and your taste buds 2, maybe 3 weeks to adjust to low sodium. You will get used to it. If you just give it time, you will adapt and you will get used to what low sodium tastes like. And then the next time you get exposed to even a little bit of salt, you're going to recoil. You're going to be like, oh, that's too much salt. But weather the storm of those 2 to 3 weeks and adjust, you will get used to it. Many, I know, South Asians are not a lot are meat eaters anyway, but some are, depending on where you are in Southeast Asia or India. But processed meat is just horrible stuff. Luncheon meat is just horrible stuff. I know it's convenient. Not only is it loaded with salt, but guess what? WHO, World Health Organization, has listed it as a carcinogen as well. Just forget that stuff. Cheese. I think we overlook cheese. It's something that we add to foods, and it is loaded with salt as well. But you have to be mindful of portion control. So if any meal you're making, you are having a little bit of cheese in it, like a sandwich, a good lunch food, make sure you are conscientious of how much you're putting in, because you have to then think of the portion size and how much sodium would be in that portion so that you're aware of staying below that threshold. And again, that magic number is 2 grams of sodium in a day. Get used to reading labels on any product at a store, okay? There's a lot to learn in there, and the more you pay attention to that, you will train yourself to choose better products. Because let's face it, as much as we make our foods from healthy, fresh ingredients, some of our meals are complemented with something that's processed from the store, like that's life, right? But read the label and choose the one with the least amount. When you see that label, this is how your eyes should go. Okay, what is the serving size? how many servings is in the container and how many calories it has. And then you can then start to go, well, how the calories are distributed, okay? Because all are important, and we're going to touch on the other parts of nutrition later, but let's focus on the sodium. When you see this column here, it's the percent daily value. It's telling you what percentage of sodium is in this package to meet the 100% amount you should have in a day. We know that around 2,000 milligrams is per day, right? But what if you ate this? You've already seen that one serving is in this package, and one serving has 36%. What if you ate the whole darn package? Don't forget, you should double this. It's 66. You see? Don't get fooled by packaging. Serving size is one serving has 36. If you eat the whole darn package, you should double that. You've ate too much salt for your day in one meal. The key here is this number should be less than 5%, okay? So per serving for sodium, that number should be 5%. If it is more than 20, that's too much. So just remember that as a rule when you're looking through labels. And don't forget the little math tricks these companies play on you, serving size. The other factor is diabetes, and we said that this is a huge problem in our community, and there are many reasons for it. We had already commented that it's going to be an epidemic not too long from now, and if you aggressively treat diabetes, if you are a diabetic, you can really, really help your health for the future. I want to also bring your attention to this concept of pre-diabetes. Some people may have been told by their family doctor that you're not diabetes, but you're borderline diabetes. That by itself is a huge red flag, because don't think, oh, I'm not diabetic, thank goodness. You are still at risk. In fact, there is ample evidence to show that pre-diabetes is also an important risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So don't think, oh, I'm not diabetic. This is a warning sign that if you don't shape up, you're in trouble. So get serious and make the changes. Weight is a very interesting area here, because World Health Organization has acknowledged that the threshold of calling someone overweight in South Asia is less than North Americans. Why? Because the burden, the metabolic stress your body goes through at a lower weight category is much more profound than that same weight in someone of North American or European descent. So they said, you know what? I don't think we can make the same weight for everyone in the world. South Asians, we have to make a lower weight for them. Okay? So one way to look at this, and you can always go on the internet and find out what your body mass index is. There's a chart, and you punch in your height and weight, and it gives you body mass index. But the number is you should be less than 25 kilograms per meter squared. So that's something you can look up and find out where you are on that chart. Another way, and a very good predictor, and something easily done at home, is to measure your abdominal circumference. How do you do that? Above your hip, you measure with a measuring tape around your abdomen, okay? So above the hip, you take a measuring tape and measure around. For men, if you're over 90 centimeters, that is too much. And if it's a woman over 80 centimeters, it's too much. This is a predictor for cardiovascular disease. It is a predictor for diabetes. It is a predictor for hypertension. So this is a very free test. You don't have to go to any clinic to do this test. You do this at home, and you can really look at this as whether or not you are in an area you need to focus on weight. And as it relates to cholesterol, this may be another area that has influenced why South Asians might be at more risk, and it may be something genetic. We all know there's good cholesterol, and we all know that there is bad cholesterol. We are learning that in South Asians, the bad cholesterol is composed of many different subunits, okay? So under the category of bad cholesterol are many different types of bad cholesterol. South Asians happen to have more of the smaller bad cholesterol than other communities, and that may be one reason why arteries get blocked. So not only is cholesterol as an overall concept important, but we also have to acknowledge there may be some genetic factors at play on how your cholesterol is manufactured in your body. We tend to also have lower amounts of good cholesterol, just inherently. And there are ways to help boost good cholesterol, and we'll get to that, and that's through exercise. Either way, if we are already acknowledging that there is some genetic issue at play, then you should always think about, geez, if that's something I can't change, then I should better focus on the things I can, because you're kind of fanning the flames, because I can't do anything about your DNA, right? Only you can go for the walk and exercise. So you really should focus on behavior, because that might help minimize the risk of things you cannot really change and reduce its chance of causing you trouble. And we also know that because of this, we tend to start as medical physicians screening cholesterol in our communities a little earlier than you might normally do in Europeans, and also depending on the number of risk factors. So one who has a lot of risk factors, diabetes, high blood pressure, we would also look at their cholesterol because it would influence how we understand what your risk is. We did talk about stress, and just to add again, stress itself can directly cause instability in our body. It can directly cause heart attack because biochemically, stress causes the release of adrenaline. Adrenaline is a very important substance in our body, but it can be a great source of physical stress, and so that can cause problems. But, you know, if people have mental health problems, which is going to be a global epidemic also in our world, it is growing. The rates of depression and anxiety is on the rise. In fact, there is one very preeminent cardiologist who is at McMaster, Dr. Salam Yusuf, well-published physician, who has said, jokingly, when he was telling his kids what they should do in their career, he said, be a psychiatrist, because mental health disorders is on the rise. You will not be out of work, okay? So we say it jokingly, but look, we all have many things going on in our lives. You cannot ignore how it can affect our body, because it can make us perhaps change our eating habits. Then we gain weight. Gaining weight causes hypertension. Hypertension it sets off a cascade of problems. So also, as we cultivate our spiritual health and work on our physical health, part of the balance of our mental health is enhancing our lifestyle too. Alcohol we touched upon. Less is more in this particular case, and I've just, for the purpose of being complete and the walking through of risk factors, we should really keep our intake to less than 1 to 2 per day. And what does it mean by a drink? A standard drink is defined down here: a spirit, wine, or beer. So that is important. Now, we'll focus on the 2 remaining categories, which I think are the crux of healthy living, and that focuses on diet and exercise. So the number 8 factor is diet. It is the keystone of our health. Everything else can radiate from the awareness and conscientious living of how we prepare meals and what we put in our mouth. When you do this consciously, you will develop habits to avoid the things you shouldn't eat, and will make healthy choices, and it will become second nature. Like any habit, you can learn it, and it will just be automatic. But you have to go through the process of making the changes. A diet that is generally very diverse in many different nutrition groups is best. And what does that mean? Well, again, we said reduce your intake of processed foods, meats, red meats specifically, the salt and simple carbohydrates, refined breads and sugar. But if you think of your plate, think of a plate, and on that plate, half of it should be vegetables. Something colored, variation of colors, red, orange, green. Think of all the vegetables and their colors. Half of your plate should be those colors. 1/4 should be whatever protein source you have, whether it is lentils, soy product, or fish. 1/4 of your plate should occupy that, and the other 1/4 a healthy carbohydrate of some kind. Now, this is another area that becomes a problem because it is the balance of people who suffer from and battle with diabetes and also learning how to choose the right carbohydrate. Processed breads really spike your blood sugar. The more complex carbohydrates you eat, the better. So I'm talking about whole grain wheats. Think of a rice substitute. Our diet is too heavy on rice, okay? Sometimes I joke, is our culture killing us? I mean, we have to refocus on our diets here. I understand culturally you have a strong link to rice, but you should say, geez, maybe I should cut this stuff out. Choose wild rice. You know what? Choose a rice substitute. Quinoa. Many people are eating quinoa, and it's a great rice substitute. In any dish you would put rice, quinoa is a good substitute. It's similar texture, good taste. It is a very nutritionally dense grain. It has high protein and a low spike on your blood sugar. So not only is it good for the diabetics, it's just good for your health. So think of where you can replace certain nutrition pieces with something else. Other good whole grains are millet, bulgur, barley. These are things that you can find ways to implement in your diet. So be creative, but think of them. So reduce white bread, eat whole grain bread. When you're eating bread, keep a lower portion size. Obviously, that can help regulate weight, and in conjunction with exercise will be very, very helpful for you. This is a very busy slide, and I know you guys can't read it over there to my right, but in general, a broad look at when you think of diet, what are the key building blocks of a healthy diet? We all understand carbohydrates and fats and sugars, but what does it mean to be optimal in this category? Well, as I described the plate, just to put it in writing, eat more fruits and vegetables. For diabetics, I will just make the added comment that when you're eating vegetables, perhaps choose more of the green vegetables and colorful vegetables, but be conscientious of the starchy vegetables, because the starchy vegetables will convert to sugar and cause a sugar spike. So if you are diabetic, be mindful that the potato categories, turnips, and those starchy types of things, although vegetables are good, in your case, maybe eat less of that and eat more of the greens, because it's another area to be sensitive about your blood sugar, okay? But in general, more fruits, more vegetables, more whole grains. This will give you a lot of fiber. This also helps reduce our absorption of bad cholesterol as we go through the process of digestion, but very diverse, basically unadulterated grains. You know, when white rice comes to you, a lot of its outer coating has been stripped, and that's where the nutrition is. But if you eat like wild rice, it's still covered in its healthy protein coat, and that's what you want. It takes a longer time for your body to digest it and break it down, and that's why you release it into your body slowly, and your sugar doesn't spike as high. You understand? White rice, you eat it, boom, sugar goes up and down. And these constant up and down, up and down, up and down, it's too much of a stress on your body. So this is somewhere that I introduced the concept, but you have to go home and think about, what does it mean? What are the foods that spike my sugar? I will give you this term, glycemic index. So if you note that down and you can Google it at home, you can see what are foods that have a high glycemic index. That means what foods make my blood sugar go very high after I eat it. You want to avoid those. And then you can alternatively choose foods that don't do that as much, okay? So that's a term for you. As it relates to protein sources, obviously there are many vegetarian sources of protein. Soy, lentils are very good. Even some of the whole grains, if you complement it with the right pairing, you can get a complete protein intake. And if you don't eat meat, don't become a meat eater just because you think you need the nutrients. And if you eat red meat, eat less. In terms of cholesterol, this is where the pendulum keeps swinging. People are saying fats are bad, then they say fats are good. So we still don't know, but in general, mono and polyunsaturated fats are good, and we should in general keep our intake of saturated fat less. So what does this mean? Olive oil, canola oil, these healthy oils are good for you. So be conscientious to perhaps use this more in favor of other things. If you're consuming dairy, you know, if you're having 2%, well, make 1%. You know, in our culture, we make yogurt at home a lot. If that's unique to you guys, don't use 1%. It still makes a good yogurt, believe me. It's not going to be thin, it's not going to spoil your appetite, but use less percentage fat in your dairy. It's an easy switch you can do, and it still tastes good, and you can even drink soy milk occasionally too as a substitute from other milks. So just be creative, think of other areas you can get nutrition, okay? And if you're eating margarines, make sure they don't have the trans fats, and a lot of them are labeled with healthy heart symbol, so you know that you're getting the right margarine, and maybe perhaps don't use butter as much because it has higher saturated fat. I'm not saying eliminate it, but with butter and ghee, be conscientious of not consuming it too much per day, okay? Perhaps for many in the room, coconut is a source of nutrition, and this is an area I will quite frankly tell you, the jury's still out because we're not sure if the saturated fat content of coconut oil is good or bad. Some are saying bad, some are saying maybe it's not so bad as we think. So I would only say that think about how much of it you're consuming, but regulate it. Be conscientious per day that you're not overdoing it, because in general, you don't want to have a tip of some nutrition source being higher proportion than others anyway. You want to have all nutrition groups evenly distributed, as I had said. So if anything, take a moment of pause through the day as you go through breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and say, oh, you know, at lunchtime I had a lot of coconut, maybe for dinner I won't, and I'll choose something else. That's all. You have to think. Again, I don't want to bore you with science here, but I think we can just see the difference here. And this is related to just even fiber intake. People who had a higher amount of fiber in their diet, so this is coming from whole grains, if you eat over 30 grams of it, you actually will reduce your chance of a cardiovascular death. And that's just eating more fiber. So think about that. And another one, hypertension. You will have less hypertension when you eat more vegetables and fruits and lower your fat intake. That's been demonstrated clearly. Your blood pressure on both the top and bottom numbers go down. So you can see the benefit of simply what your body does and how it reacts by what you put in your mouth. So this is very profound, and if anything comes out of today, it's just going through your life with awareness. As much as we are busy, etc., you have to take a moment to consider your meal planning, quite frankly, and making sure you are hitting all the areas of optimal eating habits, because you will benefit. In one particular study, again, they showed that if you ate up to 8 servings of fruit per day and vegetables per day, you had a much lower chance of having heart disease. So again, we see it in fiber, we see it in the effect on blood pressure, we're seeing it in terms of heart disease. So you have to consider what a serving is, and oftentimes that's like a half a cup of something or a cup of something. And it's very easy to accumulate your servings. You know, you have handful of fruit here, you had a slice of bread there, or you're having half a cup of serving of some vegetable through the day. If you actually maybe did a food diary, which I encourage people to do if they really want to get a sense of, geez, how much salt am I eating? And am I getting enough servings? Well, one way to do it is simply write down all the foods you had every day for 1 week. Then as a family, you guys can sit down and say, well, okay, how do we categorize this? Okay, this was processed food. How much salt was in that? Let's write it down. And let's add up the categories of fruit and veg we had on these days and get a true reflection of what you're doing. Maybe you're doing better than you think, but let me tell you, if the rude awakening comes that you're not doing enough after you've done that little week, you better change. So I encourage people to do that because I think we get easily in our habits and we have a routine. We know what we want to make, what day of the week, this and that. But this is, I'm telling you to walk more slowly. When you do, you will be more aware of what you're doing, and it will be good feedback for you to find out where you need to make some adjustments. So I encourage people to do that because, again, even it's hard to have a concept of, how many grams of this did I eat? We don't really know that, but we know how many servings we ate, but I know what food is what. So you simply categorize, this food goes in the fat category, this food goes in my whole grain category, this goes in my fruit and veg category. We can all do that. So get a good reflection of what you're doing. I think you will learn a lot from that experience. So I would encourage you guys to do that. One particular diet, in cardiovascular disease, the one thing lacking are good, trials where we study how it affects people. We do that with medication. We know that this medication works because they did it in a trial. But diets is a harder area. It's very subjective how people report. But one diet that was studied is the Mediterranean diet. Okay, a Mediterranean style diet actually has been shown to reduce cardiovascular disease. So in general, a Mediterranean diet is one that, again, is high in fruits and vegetables. They eat a lot of olive type oils, monounsaturated oils. They eat as their protein source more fish. They don't eat a lot of red meat. They eat lentils, legumes, nuts, and they have little or no dairy or low-fat dairy. So a Mediterranean diet really reflects the optimal style diet, and then we can look at our own diets to see where we can be creative to elevate that style in our own cooking. So, if in North India we eat roti and chapati, right? Or if you're having an idli, if you like ghee on it, you know what? Why don't you put olive oil on it? I mean, think you can do something else. Dip it in olive oil. That might be tasty, as opposed to using ghee or butter. So there's opportunities to make even little decisions that might possibly go a long way. Okay, now we're on our last topic here. So we're on the home stretch, and this is related to exercise. I left this one last because I think this is probably another area that is huge for us. Because quite frankly, we are lazy. In the world, this is a growing problem. It is a major problem in the world, okay? And we also know there are clear benefits to activity. So this paradox, it confuses me because this is advice we give all the time, but it is the one area that it is very hard for people to establish changes, People are so willing to take the medication for their blood pressure, but it is so hard to get people to get into a routine of just being more physically active. This is a true comment on human nature because it takes effort, it requires change, and it's hard for some people to maintain the habit. But I'm here to tell you that it's not hard, and you can do it. So it's important to know when I speak to you about either physical activity or exercise, there are two different concepts, okay? So for those of you over there, physical activity is bodily movement that produces increases in energy expenditure above just resting. So that could be simply when you go to work, the up and down movements in the office, or doing household activity, you're vacuuming, going up and down stairs with laundry basket, carrying yard waste to the curb. That's movement and that's physical activity. Exercise, however, is structured. This is a moment of time where you are doing something at a high level that is repetitive and with the main purpose to improve physical fitness. So you can understand the difference. If you are walking on the treadmill for 30 minutes, that's exercise. But if you are vacuuming the house, that's physical activity. And I'm here to tell you that both are equally important and both are very good for you. There are so many benefits of exercise, and I think it's worth at least articulating it out to all of you what they are. You can reduce your chance of an untimely death. You can reduce your chance of dying from heart disease. You can reduce your chance of stroke. You can reduce your chance of developing diabetes. You can reduce your risk of developing high blood pressure. You can reduce your chance of developing colon cancer or breast cancer. You can reduce your feelings of depression and anxiety. In fact, exercise is a good antidote to stress. It helps you regulate your weight. You can help bone strength, muscle strength, joint strength, and balance. Reduce your chance of falls, which can lead to a bone fracture, which is a very common thing in our elderly community. And it can reduce your chance of dementia. You tell me any medication that can do all that. Tell me which pharmacy is dispensing can do all that. This is, again, it is a frustrating thing for me in my office because look at what you can get by just simply making adjustments in your life. And it's free. You don't have to pay for a gym membership to get these benefits. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to move more and sit less. Funnily enough, we are seeing this as a bigger problem in developed countries. Perhaps we have been spoiled by urbanization and globalization and we have conveniences, whereas in third world countries, we see, for example, diabetes is much less common in the villages of India than it is in the urban areas. Why? They are working long hours, they are eating less, they're moving. They're moving. They're not in an urban environment and have a car taking them 5 blocks when they could walk it instead. No. Sedentary behavior is increasing everywhere. And being sedentary alone is a risk factor for death. So you should think about your day and not sit for very long. I want a light bulb to go into your mind when you've sat for more than 45 minutes and say, geez, I better get up and move. I've been sitting too long. I need to do something. Because if you can think that way, you will change your behavior and you will benefit. We all know, again, that I don't have to prove with a graph that smoking is bad for you. We all know that. I mean, it's very intuitive for many people. But I'm also here to tell you that the magnitude of burden that sitting has is now informing us to tell you that sitting is the new smoking. Sitting is almost as bad. So if we shudder at the thought of smoking, you better shudder at sitting for too long. Okay? That is very important, and if this is the critical point I want you guys all to get today, because I see it in my parents sometimes, and I see it in older community, elderly folks. We sit too much. So this raises the obvious thing. We all need guidance. What does it mean? Tell me what I should do, doc. What do I do? Well, let's lay down some concepts here then that perhaps will give you some insight. There is no demonstration that one type of exercise is superior to another, okay? So that's important. In general, what we do advise in optimal conditions is that if you can be physically active for up to 150 minutes per week, so that could be as little as 20 or 30 minutes of something structured 5 days a week. It could be a brisk walk for 25 to 30 minutes. But importantly, if you are able-bodied, you should really make sure you're trying to get a pace of at least a 3 to 4 mile per hour rate. So if you're walking briskly and doing it for a sustained period of time, that moderate intensity of activity is very good. But I don't want you to fall into the dangers of going through your day, sitting all day, and doing 20, 30-minute walk and patting yourself on the back and say, I did my exercise. Because you sat all day. So if you are physically active during the day, okay, I'm gonna go do my shopping, then I come home, I'll do the dusting, I'll vacuum. Oh, you know what, I have to do some yard work. If you are doing a lot of moments of movement during the day, that's very good, and for some, that's all we can expect of them, because for many reasons, people have orthopedic problems, people are frail, but if they're up and about doing things, then that might be the goal for them. But for another, it might be doing all of that during the day, but then also adding the 20, 30-minute brisk walk in the evening or any time of day. So more is always better. One prescription does not fit all, because everyone is different, everyone's circumstances are different. But in general, if you are doing more than what you are doing now, will have been better for you. So, for many, that 150 minutes of moderate intensity work, I can't expect from them. But if they do other things and achieve at least a modest goal through their day, they will have benefited in real ways. It will have had an impact on some of these risk factors we spoke about. So don't think, oh, geez, I can't do that, because you should be thinking, geez, if I even do more, I will benefit, because you will. So, no one needs you to go and get a gym routine, gym membership. You have to think about your lifestyle. You have to think about what you enjoy. Some people have a treadmill in their home. Good for them, and they can use it. Some people don't have the space or the money to have treadmill in their home, so they can walk outside. The point is, find out what you are willing to do as a routine, because the key here is you want to make a habit. So do something that you will enjoy, because then it will be something you do for the long term. If you set a lofty goal that's not achievable, oh, I'm going to get a personal trainer and I will go to the gym 3 times a week, and you're setting yourself up for failure because that's not what you're going to do, you'll have only probably added to your disappointment that, oh, geez, this is getting very hard. So just think about simple goals. Simple goals. Once you've developed that habit, then you can go to the next level and add to it. Okay? So for each individual, I can't give one statement of what the prescription is. I can give you a generality of what would be optimal, but under that, each and every one of you might have different ways to achieve it. Okay? Things that might give you the reflection of a moderate exercise. Brisk walking I spoke of. That's free, readily available. Yes, it can be done 365 days a year in Canada, believe me. You have to be creative. Swimming, treadmill, elliptical. You have to think of what you have access to. You don't always need a class, but you should do something you enjoy. Again, the total amount of activity is how you should think. It's not necessarily what you did per day, but what you accumulate per week. And really, you should try, on top of your physical activity, have something that gives you a little bit more structure, ideally for at least 15 to 20 minutes, because anything less, perhaps you're not getting as much value out of that exercise. So if you are going to do something that is exercise related, you really should sustain it for at least 15 to 20 minutes, because then you'll start to get some calorie burning, you will start to improve your cardiac fitness. So it does need to be for a little bit of time, but then you bank it, you add it up, and the benefit is through the week, okay? And you should sit less and get up and do things more. And again, as little as 15 to 30 minutes a day can have wonderful benefits for you. You don't need to get caught and bogged down with the idea of, oh, what heart rate do I need to get to? Some people like to look at their heart rate and make sure they're getting at the heart rate. But I'm here to tell you that you shouldn't necessarily focus on that. In fact, you don't need to focus on that. Pay attention to how you feel. If you are doing something, let's just take walking as an example, okay? Let's say you're walking briskly, and you've 10, 15 minutes into the walk, if you feel a little tired, if you feel you're breathing more, and maybe you've perspired a bit, guess what? That's a good intensity of exercise. If you've walked and you felt like you were walking the pace that you walk in your house, you need to realize that that's probably not enough. So any type of exercise that makes you feel a little bit breathless, makes you feel a little tired, might get you to break a sweat, you can take that as an interpretation that this activity is at the right intensity for me, okay? That I'm getting good physical workout here. And again, set your goals to do things that you will enjoy, because the key here is I want you to motivate yourself to make a habit. Don't make exercise a burden, which is unfortunately the biggest problem. So again, any risk factor you have should be treated in consultation with your doctor aggressively. If you do not have risk factors, you need to be aware of what they are, and the best way to avoid some of these, quite frankly, is centered on a lifestyle that incorporates good physical exercise and good eating habits. And sit less and move more, all right? So for many of you, even walking home with that point could go a long way. When you start to think in your mind, gosh, and get anxious and concerned that you've been sitting too long and feel, geez, I don't like the fact that I'm sitting too long, then I will have accomplished my mission today. Because if you can sit hours at a time and not even think about what you're doing, that's the problem. If I can even spark that little thought in your mind to say, geez, I need to get up and do something, that will be the start. Start from there and build up to higher levels of exercise. You will get the reward in your life, in your physical health. And just to tie into something I was told earlier, we cultivate our spiritual health and we work on our physical health. But if you keep an open heart, maybe you won't need surgery. All right? So thank you very much. Any questions for anybody? Sleep is very important, okay? There are many, overall I think many people in general may not get good sleep. They might have physically been in bed for 6 or 7 hours, maybe 8 hours, but the quality of that sleep may not be good. So quality and quantity of sleep are important, because lack of good sleep can lead to promoting a lot of the factors we were talking about. Fatigue during the day, obesity, hypertension. So it is very important. Sleep hygiene is very important. Yes.
How will you hear about butter and comparison between butter and margarine?
So with butter, you're more likely, you will have higher saturated fat, and a lot of the margarines have very little saturated fat and more mono and polyunsaturated fats. So those fats are good for you. Now, when we look at the general diet, we are not saying, we're saying minimize your saturated fat. So the amount of saturated fat should be less than 10% of your day. Remember that food label? 10% should be only saturated fat. But you have to think about a serving size of butter. It packs a big punch, and so if you're having butter throughout the day, you will quickly go above that 10%. So be conscientious. Margarines are better because they have a healthier distribution of good fats.
What about ghee? Because South Asians, ghee is a big
Yes, so here's a few thoughts. Use lower dairy when you make it. That's one. So maybe make it with 1%. And I know it has the rice, so if you're going to do that, maybe throw some fruit in it. Make it creative. You're having the kheer, why not get a fruit serving out of it and put some berries on it? I might even challenge you to use a different grain rather than rice. Bulgur has a similar texture to cooked rice when it's in kheer. I don't know how it will taste. I've never tried it. But think about it, even millet. Oh, ghee. I'm sorry, I thought you said kheer. That's my North Indian in me coming out, so I'm listening to North. Yeah. So look, you will get your antioxidants from other things. You don't have to think ghee is your holy grail for your source of antioxidants. But it is, again, I don't know, and this is my own ignorance on this, I don't know how much of the saturated fat content comes out when compared to butter. But in general, you have to look at how much you're using it and how often. So I would suggest that if you're using it, you use less and use it lightly in your cooking, but also promote the use of other oils, quite frankly. Like some of the oils that have shown to be really good are some of the vegetable-based oils that are non-tropical, so olive and canola. So if it fits your recipe, try some of these other options. I'm sorry? Coconut oil. So this comes back to the area of uncertainty, because coconut oil has a lot of saturated fat, but some argue that that saturated fat might help promote some good parts of cholesterol. But I will tell you, it does make your bad cholesterol go up. It does make your bad cholesterol go up. So that would be something I simply say, be conscientious of how much you're eating per day and regulate it. Well, I will tell you, as it relates to olive oil, the amount of olive oil these Mediterraneans ate per day was 60 ml. That's almost 2 tablespoons, if that puts it in perspective. And that amount was shown to be beneficial, but that's olive oil, and you have to be careful. We can't extrapolate it to all oils, but we would say a healthy oil in that category, it would be safe to think that in that amount. So that was 60 ml of olive oil was the amount that people were having per day. So I think it's just the refinement techniques. You can read the label. The extra virgin may have a higher percent of the monounsaturated fats, but extra virgin olive oil is so readily available, and I don't think it's added cost from a regular olive oil. But I think you have to keep in mind the other aspects. Some olive oils may not be good for cooking because of their temperature point. So I think that's the consideration you'd probably have to use, and you'd have to research that, because you would say which one is good for cooking and which one is good for adding on cooked food. And that may be the difference. Extra virgin may have a lower smoke point, so you may not want to be frying or cooking with it. Yeah, so again, with the 8, that graph I showed you, that was 8 servings of fruit and vegetable combined. So it's not necessarily 8 of fruit per day. So again, nutritionally diverse. And for the diabetics, you have to be conscientious of portion control. So if you're having your fruit, make sure you are aware through your diabetes education of the portion size that would be good for that moment. So if you're having 1 serving of fruit, that's appropriate to minimize your blood sugar, but still get the benefit of the fruit. But that's for that moment. Your other serving of fruit could be later in the day once that's been digested in another part of the day, and you get your other serving. So it's not 8 of fruit per day, it's 8 of fruit and veg per day as a guideline. It helps you at least understand that if you're really below that bar, you know that you have a goal to work to enhance your diet. So you will definitely unlock more nutrition when you cook your vegetables, okay? A lot of the things will be easily absorbed when it's cooked. Like if you take any green, for example, if it's sauteed and steamed, for example, you'll get a little bit more out of it. Like, for example, spinach. If it's eaten raw in a salad, you may not extract all of the other minerals like iron and calcium from it. So cooked will break down some of the toughness that will make the digestion easier. Yes. Yeah. would suggest that you really look to minimize your rice, and I don't know if brown rice will be a little better because it has a little bit of the protein envelope on it. It hasn't been stripped away, so it might cause less blunting of your blood sugar. But I think, if anything, try to find another substitute whenever you can, and maybe set a limit on how many times a week you're eating any kind of rice, and say, well, maybe there's an opportunity to just simply choose a different grain that replaces rice, because I think that would probably in the long run be more sustainable and better, because if you replace it completely with brown rice and you're still having too much during the week, that's not the message I want to give you either. Well, unless you're really having trouble with your bowels, I mean, you may not need to take the psyllium, because you get fiber in a lot of things. You're going to get it in your vegetable servings, you're going to get it in your fruit, you're going to get it in your whole grains, and if you're eating a lot of that, you're getting a lot of fiber. So you may not need to top up unless you're dealing with some constipation. So as a rule, you shouldn't need to do that. Yes. So if you are in an office environment and have to sit in front of a desk, you should say, okay, after I've been sitting for 45 minutes, an hour, I'm simply going to go and walk down the hallway, maybe go up 2 flights of stairs and come back. You can accomplish that quickly, walk briskly. You break up that sitting moment, and you will have probably not compromised your productivity at work in any way, believe me. So just be conscientious. Get up, walk, shake your legs out, go up 2 flights of stairs, come back. And that way you're doing that almost every hour, and your work day's done, and you'll have done that. Oh, this is another concept. Something that might be also a good benchmark for you, and it may be useful, is these days a lot of people are using pedometers. I don't disagree with them. Why? Because it gives you a goal. If you put one on and got a sense of how many steps you're making per day, then say, okay, my goal is to double that. Okay? Find out how much steps you're doing in a typical day and set a goal of doubling it. So that makes you aware and conscious. You know by the end of the day, oh, I still have 1,000 steps. Oh, I better go for a walk. It's going to change your behavior. As you get more used to getting these goals, then you say, oh, I've doubled it. Now I'm going to double that again. And then get up to at least 10,000 per day. But start with smaller goals. It will change your behavior, because guess what? If you're walking and getting those steps, that means you're not sitting. So think about that. Very inexpensive thing to do. Maybe a holiday gift for somebody, okay? Omega-3s. No evidence that you need to supplement your diet with omega-3s. There's some evidence, and it's considered reasonable in people who have established cardiovascular disease, but in people who have never suffered cardiovascular disease, there is absolutely no benefit in supplementing omega-3s. I will say save your money.
What's the difference between hypertension and stress? Yes.
So stress is the physical expression of one's mental state. Hypertension could be the product of that. So hypertension is measurable. We check in the office what your BP is. Stress can promote higher BP. In the back there, yes. No, yeah.
Vitamin B12 and D are deficient in North American Indian communities who are vegetarian. So B12, of course, comes from meat, and we don't eat meat. And sun is not
yeah,
so much.
So I think it's wise to probably supplement vitamin D. In this climate, this latitude, we don't get enough sun, and vitamin D supplementation is probably very reasonable, and I know a lot of people do that. And what was the other one?
B12.
B12. A lot of milk is fortified with B12, so you'll get it in dairy, but choose a low-fat dairy. You'll still get your B12. Sometimes you need to supplement it. Often it takes a long time for your B12 stores to get depleted because you have months supply, but we see it in our elders because they may not keep up on their daily dairy intake to keep their B12 up. And at the end of the day, they might need supplementation, okay? Yeah, so salt is salt, okay? If you are using table salt, that is not the greatest proportion of our sodium intake. That's actually a small proportion. So if you're drastically cutting down on your processed foods and you made food at home, you taste it first, and if you felt you need a little bit, you can put a little bit because that's not a lot of your intake. Even a little bit for your own personal flavor, you're not adding a lot. So the daily amount of sodium is 1 teaspoon. 1 teaspoon of salt is equivalent to your total day's sodium intake, if that puts it in perspective. A pinch of salt is not that much in the great scheme of things. So if you're putting a pinch on your food, it's okay, but make sure it's not in the food to begin with, because store-bought food has too much salt. If you control that, you will be in control of your sodium intake. Young man.
Is it good to be a vegetarian, yes or no?
The quick answer is yes. In fact, the World Health Organization has stated that the most healthful diet could be learned from a vegetarian-style diet. But don't be fooled. Some of the aspects of a vegetarian diet are too carbohydrate heavy. So don't think you have the best diet in the world, because sometimes you don't. You have to be nutritionally diverse and make sure that not one nutrition group is heavier than the others. Definitely reducing your intake of people who eat meat, red meat, that is linked to colon cancer. You get higher saturated fat, could be related to cardiovascular disease. So you are controlling that. But if you're eating a vegetarian diet, you have to make sure you're eating it smartly. Candies? So, in general, any candy with refined sugar, I can't tell you of any candy that has proven to have health benefit other than enjoyment. So let's understand that life is about living everything in moderation. And if you, in general, are aware and conscientious of what you're eating and take very good initiative and pride in eating healthy, if you're having a little candy here and there, it's not the end of the world, but portion control. You don't eat the bag, you eat 1 or 2 of them, right? But, you know, even, here's a tip also. A lot of us have that desire to maybe have a little something sweet at the end of our meal. And I think sometimes it's a reflection of the meal itself. Because if you have a craving, often it might be because you've had too much carbohydrate. Carbohydrates don't give you a sense of fullness. Unless it's a whole grain, your body's spending time on digestion, and you'll feel a little full. You don't feel like having any sweet. Carbohydrate, you get quickly, your stomach feels, oh, I should have something more, and you want sweet. So if you're having too much sweet, maybe that's a sign that you have to look at your dinner plate again. Because the more diverse, the more complex it is, and the more your body's dealing with it, you may not need that. And guess what? Then you can give yourself a treat. Maybe you have 1 little square of dark chocolate for the enjoyment of eating it, and maybe those antioxidants we were talking about, I don't know. But then you might find that all you need is a little taste just for that human desire and need of satisfaction, but you will have only given yourself a little bit of it, because then it ends up being high calorie, low nutrition. That's what desserts are. So we don't know of any ill effects of the artificial sweeteners, but obviously a good substitute for sugar, because these ones you don't absorb, they don't cause the blood sugar spike, you get the taste. The rest of it goes through your digestive system, so it won't add to your sugar spiking burden. So when at all possible, if sugar is a big problem for you, look for sugar substitutes when you can. Some people bake with them too, and try different ways with that. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, because again, these are our sources of carbohydrate, right? So you could say I can have a different type of carbohydrate or grain in place of your rice, and you could just reduce your portion of rice and choose other grains to compensate for that. Okay, all right. Thank you very much. All right.
Excuse me, but I had a
Oh, we had one last one here.
Are pies a healthy dessert?
So there are things you can do. I like pie as well, but if you're making it at home, you're in control of all of the ingredients, which is good rather than buying it from the store. So that's one start, because guess what? You can follow the recipe, but you don't have to follow the recipe. What I mean by that is the recipe might say, put this much sugar, but you're going to say, you know what, I'm not going to put that much. I'm going to put half that. Thank you very much. Because then you can put less.
So it could be a healthy snack or not a healthy snack?
Well, I would look at it as a treat to complement the rest of your day. Don't look at it as being your main source of nutrition, let me say. But you could think of it as if you're having apple pie, you are getting your apple, you're getting your serving there, but you put less sugar in it. You could make it more healthy, that's for sure. All right? Great.